So this is part two, monetary history. How and where did the very first bank come into existence? The answer is in the Sichuan province of China in the 11th century. Now, why was it invented in China? Because the Chinese people were the very first ones to invent paper money, also known as fiat money, through the printing press. So, before, everyone was using gold, silver, and copper coins for trade and barter, right? But as you know, if you have a lot of metal coins, if you're carrying a lot of metal coins, it's heavy. So, what the people did in the Sichuan province was open up vaults where you could deposit your metal coins. And then what they did, they gave receipts out, paper receipts for, say, here's 10 ounces of silver, here's a receipt for 10 ounces of gold, here's a receipt for 10 ounces of copper, whatever. And after a while, people stopped using metal coins because it was so much more convenient to use these paper receipts because it was so much lighter. So things worked out fine for a while, but then the people running the early banks, the vault owners, what they did, they started getting really greedy and deceitful. They started printing more receipts than they had of gold or silver coins. So this was actually an early form of deficit spending. So instead of having the gold and silver now, the bank owners, they were saying, we will have it in a month, 3 months, in a year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. And the deficit kept going larger and larger. So what happened? Well, just think about it. If you had the power to print money, how would that affect your lifestyle? Think of the things you can buy, the things you can do. It made the early bankers very rich and powerful. They were able to buy the largest properties, the most expensive properties, the best land, the best security force. They were able to basically buy out the politicians and the police force. They became even more powerful than the local governments. So at the same time, prices of everything started getting higher. Because think about it, there's more money in the system now, but there's still the same amount of houses, goods, products, but there's just more money. So they caused a bidding war, and then prices started going up, and there was hyperinflation. So the people got really distrustful of the bankers, the people owning the vaults. And then there was a major bank run. And they wanted to get all the original gold and silver, all the metal coins they had deposited originally. But when they tried to cash, to get their money back, they found out that they didn't have it. The banks didn't have it because, they were printing more receipts than they had of actual inventory. So then what happened? The central government of China came down to this local province, and they found out there was like rioting, mass chaos, and they figured out, oh, it was these vault owners. They were printing more receipts than they had actual inventory of gold and silver coins. And then they got really deceitful too. They said, you guys can't do this. Only the central government could do this. So it spread from a local province in Sichuan, China, to the main central government of China at the time. And also during this time, during the 11th and 12th century, European explorers were starting to visit China, like Marco Polo. Before he could enter China, the port of China, he had to turn over all his gold, silver coins, which they were using in Europe at the time, and in exchange they gave him paper. And when the European explorers went back to Europe, they thought, hey, these Chinese people are really weird. They're not using gold, silver coins. What they're using is these really thin slices of wood, for money. So that's how the banking system moved to west, to Europe. And then, of course, the Europeans, they started colonizing the world. So that's how it spread worldwide. Like when the British, they colonized North America, at gunpoint, they threatened the Iroquois Indians to use their paper money instead of what they were using at the time, which were like feathers or like cattle for trade and barter. So they had to use their paper money. So in a simplified example, how does the banking system work? So say we're in a really small world of only 4 people. There's 3 regular people and 1 banker. And as of right now, there's only $4 in existence in the entire world. Now, to buy a pen, it's going to cost you 1/4 of all the dollars in the world. So it's going to cost you $1, right? Now, let's say the banker prints another $4 into existence. So the banker now has $5, and there's $8 in the entire world. But a pen still costs 1/4 of all the dollars in the world, so now it's $2. So now the regular people, they each have $1 each. They can't afford this pen. But the banker, he can afford 2.5 pens. So this is a basic form of inflation. In its simplest term, this is how inflation works. It transfers buying power to the bankers and the owners of the financial system. As they print more money, their buying power increases and everyone else's buying power in turn decreases. So why does the likelihood of the system succeeding increase with more people in your population? I mean, just think about it. If there's only 4 people in the world, are you guys going to let me, are the other people going to let me just sit on my butt all day and print money as a banker while they have to work hard for their money? This system won't work with 4 people or even 100 or 1,000 people or even 100,000 people. But with 1,000,000 people in your system, this system might work. With 1 billion people, it's a lot better. The chances of this system working is a whole lot better. With 7 billion people in the world, like we have right now, it thrives. This kind of system works fine. So why does this system work with more people? The answer is complexity and compartmentalization. You see, if we live in a very small community of only 4 people, right away, you can see what another person is doing and how it affects your livelihood. If you just went back only a few hundred years ago, everyone was living in small communities of only a few thousand, 10,000s of people. And so, it was very easy to see what that group of farmers, that group of hunters, that group of fishermen, group of builders, what they were doing or not doing, and how it was affecting the livelihood of everyone else in the community. But now in our modern society, everyone is living in, well, not everyone, most people are living in these mega cities of tens of millions of people. So say if you were in New York, it would be hard for you to see, like, this guy walking down the street, you would have to identify, first, he's a banker. What is and how is he doing, what is he doing for a living? How does it affect my livelihood? It's really hard to see that now. And now since there's so much people in the world, there's so much compartmentalization. There's so much hierarchy, so many departments. It's hard to see what one group in what city, one department is. How is that affecting another group, another department in another city in another nation? So it's hard to see because everything is globalized and there's so much department, so much hierarchy. So what's the stated and unstated purpose of a bank? Well, of course, a bank provides a convenient way to store your money through savings, and they provide credit cards so you can easily purchase things on credit. Instead of carrying a bunch of coins or cash, you can just use your credit card. And, if you need to make a loan, like if there's emergencies, you have a car accident or medical emergency, you could loan money from bank. But banks also load people up with debt. So how does the banking system transfer hard assets from the population to the owners and investors of the financial system? Well, the answer I believe is through debt. So, like I said previously, banks are more than willing to loan you money for, say, like a car loan or a mortgage or a business loan. But if for any reason whatsoever you can't afford to pay the monthly principal and interest on your car loan, mortgage loan, or business loan, then after a while, the banks they come back and they repossess your asset. They take your car back, they take the mortgage back, they take your business back, and then it becomes theirs. And so this is one reason why the gap between the rich and poor keeps increasing as well. And it's been increasing since the 1970s and it's still going up exponentially. So when was the United States Republic hijacked by the central bankers? Well, I believe it was in 1913. That's when the Federal Reserve was established. And also at the same time, the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, and the income tax was established at the same time. Before 1913, there was no such thing as an income tax. The way it worked before was if imports came, if you made money off the imports from other countries, you would get taxed on that. But there was no such thing as income tax before. So during this time in 1913, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States. And so basically, he sold out leadership of his country in exchange for campaign financing. So this is what Woodrow Wilson said in his memoir in 1919. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrialized nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men, who were the central bankers at the time, led by the Rothschild families and other prominent families such as the Rockefellers or at the time as well. So from 1929 until the mid-1940s, the U.S. was in a Great Depression. Why has the U.S. for the last 70 years enjoyed a greater material wealth than other nations? Well, the U.S. has done some very great things. It's invented some very innovative products. It led the world in manufacturing and development of the car, automobile, airplanes, factory, mass production, computers, space race. But you got to think globally what was happening during this time as well. During this time, other nations in the world were experiencing World War II. And as you know, World War II was a very destructive war. At the end of World War II, most of Europe was destroyed. The United Kingdom was destroyed, was bombed by the Nazis. Most of Russia was destroyed. China was destroyed, by the Japanese. Japan was destroyed. It was nuked by the U.S. So all other industrialized nations, their infrastructure, their research and development was destroyed during this time. The only country that was intact was the U.S., which still had its industrial base and research and development. So, it's very easy to be number one when you have no competition, right? Okay, so after World War II, the world powers came together in the Bretton Woods Agreement, and they gave the U.S. world reserve currency status, which means that the U.S. dollar would be used default for global business and trade. And this was to be the case as long as the US dollar maintained a ratio with gold. It was to be on a gold standard. And world reserve currency status is a great status for a nation to have because, say Russia and China were to trade cars for like bikes or whatever, they would have to do it in terms of the US dollar. Not well, it wasn't required, but it's the default way to do it. And for the US to have world reserve currency status means that it has the power to print money to pay its debt to other nations. No other nation could do this. So When and by whom was the US dollar removed from the gold standard, and what was its replacement? So in 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. It severed the link between the dollar and gold, which violated the Bretton Woods Agreement. And as many of you guys know, Nixon wasn't, out of all US presidents, he wasn't the best moral character. So, the central bankers were very easily able to corrupt him to close the link. And the bankers were given the power to print, more money out of thin air. So what was the replacement of the gold standard? The answer, I believe, was the petrodollar. So what is a petrodollar and how does the petrodollar system work? Well, according to Alan Greenspan, petrodollar has been very influential in US foreign policy for many decades now. He said, I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everybody knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil. So what is a petrodollar? It's the money that oil exporting nations receive from selling their oil, which is then deposited into Western banks. So here's the correlation. Increased oil demand leads to increased dollar demand, which leads to an increased standard of living in the US. Okay. So this is the end of part 2. We will continue in part 3, which is recent monetary history.